You may know our case, Connie Wood, the other midwife who was with me. She's another sister midwife like myself. Connie's from County Clare. For those who don't know the story, I'll try and recap it and briefly just cover it, and then I'll maybe have some comments to make afterwards. But I trained in Glasgow. I did my nurse training in Stirling Royal Infirmary way back in 1975, which was just a few years after the 1967 Abortion Act was passed. You do not say at the start of your career, I have a conscientious objection and don't participate in the abortion process, and then everybody leaves you alone for the rest of your career. It doesn't work like that. You have to reassert yourself throughout your career. The system does not and cannot accommodate two totally different philosophical points of view. So the people that work in the system, they just want the job to get done, and they're all varying, thoughts, processes going on there. So it's up to you to say, and you've got to reaffirm that with different people throughout your career. So I stayed in nursing for a while. The two areas that I was concerned about being compromised was the gynecology ward and the general theatre, because obviously the patients may come there, the gynecology patients may come there, but thankfully I got through it pretty unscathed. But then it was quite normal in those days for many nurses to go on to become midwives, which I did in Glasgow's Royal Maternity Hospital, and it was a good experience, but again I was conscious that there was the occasional patient coming to a labour ward for an abortion. And you probably all realise that these cases are the ones that they've picked up some kind of problem with the baby, a fetal anomaly. And by the way, I've heard a girl from Galway who said once that she had a baby she was carrying, had some disability, and she said she was thinking of calling it fetal anomaly because the baby kept being referred to that, and every time she came to the hospital. That's more recently, so that's what's going on in Ireland just now. So anyway, these babies that were come to the labour ward occasionally would be for some kind of disability. But I still managed to avoid it there. But I went to work, and I'm only telling you this because the parallel between two different countries. I went to work in the Middle East for about 6 years, and out there in Saudi Arabia, abortion's not permitted. So you did see a lot more cases that you would just never see back in the UK. And the people there were a lot more philosophical about, the baby's being born with some kind of handicap, or if indeed the baby died, which, you did have morbidity and mortality. So it was an education to see how philosophical their faith, prepared them for handling these kind of serious conditions. And certainly was the case, you just wouldn't see that too much back in the UK, not at all. So 6 years down the line, I came back to the UK. I eventually got a job in the Southern General Hospital, which is where Trevor worked in Eileen, and where we all met, and the place has never been the same since. No, it was a wonderful hospital, but one thing to tell you about that hospital was that Glasgow in Scotland's got a wee bit of the remainder of what goes on in Northern Ireland, sadly. However, the Southern General Hospital was one of the few hospitals where Catholic doctors could get promotion, and nurses too. So it was a poorhouse way back before the establishment of the NHS. So we did have, for the duration I'd been there, 2 clinical directors who were both practicing Catholics. Now, I differentiate between saying somebody's a practicing Christian or whatever who doesn't do abortion and those who are instinctively pro-life. I would say you're all pro-life because you're active in it. But there's a lot of people who won't do it, but they don't want to raise their heads above the parapet for different reasons. And I suppose that's what it was a little bit like. So the first consultant who was in charge, he didn't do abortion, and we all knew that. And then the next consultant who took over from him, he was the same way. The senior midwife was a very formidable, wonderful woman, Eleanor Donaghy, who went down to London actually to speak against the implementation of abortion. That was 1966-67, and she was vehemently pro-life as well. When I say that, the result was that you had a hospital that worked really quite well. There were doctors who did the abortions, there was no question about that, but there was not a great culture to promote it or to be a centre, as they call it, a centre of excellence. So you got a lot more abortions being carried out in the 2 other maternity hospitals. The Queen Mother's Hospital, which was the hospital that closed and amalgamated with ourselves, and another one, the Rotten Row, the Royal Maternity Hospital. These became the two major hospitals in Glasgow. So the Queen Mother Hospital had a referral centre where many patients came from the islands or the borders or whatever, other hospitals, to see if the babies were developing well. Now, the downside, as you all know, to fetal medicine, the good side is that it can pick up some problems that they can do something about, maybe prenatally and then certainly postnatally. But the downside is the fetal, the babies with genetic problems or something else, where they will put pressure on the girls to have abortion, and there's no question that that's what they do. It's an unconscious eugenics mentality that's developed over 50 years. So I went to work there. We did maybe in the labour ward, maybe 10 a year, if as many as that. I'm giving you a rough number, but throughout that period of time, there was more than myself and Connie Wood. There were other sisters who since retired. They didn't participate or take anything to do with abortion either. And that was always respected. So there were other sisters on duty who would take over these patients or delegate staff to do it, whereas we didn't, and that was fine. So it worked to a degree until around about 2007. And by that time, we got other consultants coming who wanted to bring earlier cases to the labour suite. Up until I had been working there, it was 20 weeks when I first started. 20 weeks was the cut-off. Below 20 weeks, anybody coming to the labour suite, whether it was a spontaneous loss, as in miscarriage, or induced abortion, they went to the gynaecology ward. After that, it was the labour ward. So this kept the numbers pretty low. However, there was this mindset of one particular consultant, and she wanted every patient who'd been picked up as having a baby with a handicap and who was going through termination to come to the labour suite. Now, we're talking here cases of 10, 12, 14 weeks, which definitely was taking up the instance. Now, I heard that from one of my managers, and when I heard that the Queen Mothers was doing, or could do on average 2 to 3 a day, I was horrified. This amalgamation was on the cards, and we had managed to, work the unit in a way that respected those of us who had conscientious objection to abortion, until this news came through that on average they were doing between 2 and 3 a day. And I knew that was going to be a major problem, because how can you avoid that? And what they were asking us to do is delegate staff. Well, if I'm not going to do something, I'm certainly not going to send somebody else in to do it, because I'm facilitating it, and I have to take responsibility for that junior person who's going into the room. So I never, ever delegated anyone. So before the closure, the amalgamation happened in 2010, more staff were actually complaining that they would do assisted an abortion maybe once every so often, maybe once every couple of months or something, if it was deemed necessary, as they see it. But then when you start being asked once a month, and then maybe every couple of weeks, or it's becoming a lot more frequent, people become very uneasy about it. And so more girls were complaining that they didn't want to be involved. So I used to say to them, and I think God was listening because he took me at my word, I used to say to them, give me the problem. And what I meant by that was, when anybody wanted to say they didn't want to take part in abortion, they would come to me in a kind of apologetic manner. And I used to say, listen, I'll support you the whole way, don't worry about that. But you've got to tell every sister that that's the way it is, and people recognise and understand who won't do abortion, and that's fine. But if I had the girls all saying to me, no, I'm not doing it, I would take it, and did take it to my managers, that there's a problem. And that's exactly what happened. If I hadn't done that and pursued it, you wouldn't know about our case. But it was me with chapping doors to find out, you've got to do something about this. So that started round about 2007. But by 2008, nothing was getting done. There was a change of management. We got a new manager from the Queen Mothers. And from the first minute I met her, I brought it to her attention that there was an unresolved issue over the termination of pregnancy, that a number of staff didn't want to be involved. I says, they're conscientious objectors, they've got every right not to take part. And I says, and I don't deal with it either. And she was stunned. She was a girl that was slightly younger than me, and she couldn't believe that she was being faced with something. And her words to me was, I've never had a problem like this before. And I'm sure she was right. But then, I mean, this is my first meeting with her. I'm not being aggressive, I'm just stating a fact so that she's aware of it and she registers it. But then she says to me, and it was like an unconscious statement that I don't think she even realised what she was saying. She says, I was looking after a girl once, and the baby was delivered and it was still alive, and I had to take it to the sluice and just keep an eye out for 2 hours before it stopped breathing. And she didn't realise that she was actually voicing something that was just such a terrible, terrible scenario, just because I mentioned about staff having a conscientious objection to the procedure. However, that went on for a while. I left it with her, didn't want to give her too much trouble because she was new to the job and all the rest. But after a period of months, nothing getting done, it was November 2008, I heard girls saying, no, Mary, we've all been told we've got to look after the woman, we just don't have to deliver the baby. Well, that is absolute nonsense. And this is for the staff midwives as well, because nobody knows when a baby's going to be delivered. And this was so far from the definition that had always been accepted. You'll maybe agree with me, Mary, that you don't have to look after a woman throughout the delivering process at all. You don't have to deal with her coming into the labour suite. We're not talking about if she asks a question or she needs a bedpan, she asks for a glass of water, as I was recently told I wouldn't do that for these women. Crazy stuff. It was the process of the abortion we did not have to engage in. So when I heard that, I was determined it was going to be resolved, because I knew that within the next few months, the incidence was going to be much, much greater when we amalgamated, and it was going to be more difficult then, and there was no way in the world I was going to be dealing with abortion. None. So, however, there was a ward meeting on the 28th of November 2008, and they discussed all these different things about the labour suite. At the end of it, they said, any other business? And I thought, right. And I have to tell you, I am no brave person at all, but for me, ultimately, it's a choice between saving my soul or feeling, doing what people tell me to do, which I know, we all know is wrong. So I kind of took a gulp and I thought, right, I'll bring it up here, because you've got to minute it, and then it's got to be dealt with. If you're talking about it, people can ignore it and say one thing, like politicians do. They'll nod away, yes, I'm pro-life, nothing of the sort, right? So I brought this up at the end of the meeting, and I said about this wasn't resolved. And then this, what I call the flawed interpretation, people started voicing their opinions, and their opinions were way off. But basically, I'm a Glaswegian, and I was just thinking, they're a bunch of chancers. They're just trying to get us to do the work because they don't want the hassle of having to deal with us. That's what they are. I didn't think anything else about it. The following day, I decided, just for my own sake, to phone the Nursing and Midwifery Council in London, just to find out exactly what their guidelines were. And I was horrified by what they told me. That's the 28th. It was the 27th the meeting was. This was the 28th of November. Because basically they were saying the exact same thing as these new younger managers, that we had to look after the women through the labour, we just didn't have to deliver the baby. And I was exploding on the phone saying, what do you mean by that? Because how can you tell? There's no sense to that. How do you know when a woman's going to deliver a baby? And what do you do then anyway? Do you get somebody? This is nonsense. So at that point I knew without a shadow of a doubt I was going to have to fight this battle. Now, no unions would come with us, because the Royal College of Midwives, I don't know if you know this from last year, they back a woman's right to choose, if she wants to choose abortion, right to term. So they were certainly not in our camp, and no other union. I just tentatively inquired, but I knew they wouldn't be with us. So we had to fight this ourselves. We couldn't bring anybody outside into the hospital, because it goes through the hospital process, the grievance process, before you're allowed then to take it into the realm of other people like lawyers. But it was the most stressful thing you can imagine, and we were keeping everything quiet. I didn't want things to go in the paper. It was trying to resolve it, and I honestly thought we would resolve it without all this fuss. We had a number of meetings, and eventually they backed down. And I was thinking, wow. But by that time, I had made a decision. I could not stay working in that environment. The hospital was changing so much, and the people we were getting to work with were totally different from the good core of people we worked with before. And I decided that I was going to leave and go and work with post-abortive women. That was my plan. And I had a job lined up with SPUC to do that. But I wanted to get this all tied up and finished. And we had achieved so much, and I thought, right, okay, it's just another wee bit further. However, various reasons, the hospital senior staff reversed their decision for Connie and I, and they threw down the gauntlet, and I got an email in April 2010 to say, if you want to take it further, meaning if you want to carry on with the grievance, which we'd started in 2008, just carry on. So I spent 2 years, really myself, writing these reports, challenging the senior staff, going to meetings, preparing these things to go through the formality of what's really like court hearings within the health board, and then ready to leave because it was just an intolerable situation, only to be told in a terrible email, just do what you like, you have to do the job. And that was on the 10th of March 2010. And the shock for me was that this is only now starting. And so it impacted on my health. I became quite unwell, and I haven't worked since then. I haven't worked as a midwife since then in a hospital. But my blood pressure went up. I came out, and within 3 weeks, I woke up one morning, my face was bloated away out. It was as if somebody had come in with a pump. And I've been left with this condition called urticaria angioedema syndrome. And it's all due to the stress of what I went through. We had to then reenact the grievance. That took us right up to 2011. And we in total had about 16 meetings with different senior people, including the health board members, before we finished that. And they didn't uphold our rights to grievance. In other words, they said you had to manage these patients. Basically what they're saying to Connie and I is we've got to make sure this abortion gets done. We've got to delegate staff. We've got to supervise them. If we send in a person who's not got experience in dealing with this, we're responsible. And that's not participation. So this is what it all came down to. So we got the lawyers were always there in the background, but it was from then we handed it over to the lawyers and they took it to the courts. We went to Edinburgh in 2012. In that instance we lost. That's when it became very well known and made the papers. We appealed it, and 3 judges in Edinburgh, 3 appeal judges, unanimously supported us. Now, this is just a fact. I'm not being political, but had we separation, and I'm not telling you whether I think that's good or bad, I'm just saying, but if we had separation, the judgment they made in Edinburgh would have supported us, and did support us unanimously. No mention of religion, which I was delighted about, because it is not. I always tell people, everyone's got a conscience. I've got a girl who came to me and she says, Mary, I'm not belonging to any particular religion. It's nothing to do with that. It's your conscience, and everyone has got a conscience. There are people who are atheists who don't believe in the practice of abortion, and that's right. So it's an insult to them to think it's just a Catholic thing, which it's not. So anyway, the judgment was a wonderful judgment and very well rationed. However, the health board appealed that. We went down to the Supreme Court in 2014, and Lady Smith and the entourage, 5 judges, unanimously didn't uphold it. So we lost the case in 2014, and it's left us now with a situation where there's no rights to conscience for senior midwives. I'm talking about from sisters upwards, and they've restricted even what a staff midwife could have got away with before. In fact, the wording in the courtroom does not protect doctors at all back home, or pharmacists. However, I don't want it to sound all bad, because since then, I've been told, and I think it's true as well, the case has resurrected the pro-life movement back in the UK. John Smeaton told me that, and I personally have been asked to speak. I was in Australia, I was in Rome, and I go up and down the country now a lot to talk about it. And it's a human rights issue. It's an absolute human rights issue. Now, the other thing I believe very strongly is we should not be defending ourselves. I mean, we're professionals here, and I always say we can defend this on science. Now, the people that are fighting against us, they're telling a pack of lies, and it should be called for what it is. We've got the evidence on our side, and when they say the opposite, we should challenge them on that and say, well, of course you're going to say that because you want to do it. One other thing I'll say is about conscientious objection is it's like before the Abortion Act was passed, we were here. We were working in good medicine, good midwifery, good obstetrics. Women were safer. And what I feel is when the Abortion Act came past, those of us who are against it, we were knocked onto a ledge, at the ledge of conscience. Well, now they're stamping on our feet. We're holding on to it, but they're stamping on our feet to let go. That's where, forget safety nets and everything else. We need to climb back up, reclaim that land, let them know how good and how beneficial this is for women on science. We don't need to mention religion at all, and get it back. And you've got Irish genes, please don't let me down. Thank you.